There's a long tradition of Christian persecution of homosexual people. But in fact, there's also a counter-tradition where Christian churches welcomed homosexual people. Christian voices were extremely diverse, and we can see an example of this standing here at St Peter's, Eastern Hill in Melbourne. It was a church that welcomed homosexual people at least as far back as the 1940s, 1950s, and probably earlier. St Peter's, Eastern Hill adhered to one of the three traditions within Anglicanism, the one known as Anglo-Catholicism, which is mostly recognised by people for extreme flamboyance, incense, vestments, the high mass. Very different to the kind of low Anglicanism, which was much more austere. In most Australian cities, there was one Anglican church, usually Anglo-Catholic, that was welcoming of homosexual people. Sydney, of course, had two, Christ Church St Lawrence and St James. Adelaide had St Mary's. In Brisbane, it was All Saints on Twickenham Terrace. In Melbourne, it was St Peter's, Eastern Hill. The vicar at St Peter's from 1926 to 1924 was Farnham Maynard, and he was known for his radical approach to questions such as poverty and the role of the church in the community. He was also, and this was less publicly known, very accepting, or at least tolerant, of homosexuals, who did indeed gather at his church during this period. His social and political radicalism led him to a position of tolerance for homosexuality, and he wrote about this to one of his colleagues in 1950, talking about homosexuality as a problem, but recognising that it involved both women and men, which was a bit unusual at the time, and also not as a problem to be eradicated or to be persecuted, but rather to be understood and to be dealt with. For Maynard, homosexuals were also God's children, and this put upon the church a responsibility to treat them respectfully. He recognised that many homosexuals were in fact damaged. He talked about the way in which they might be mentally queer, with no normal sense of right or wrong, but he didn't apply this to everybody. Some indeed he described as very lovable, and he went out of his way to make those people welcome in his church. The fact that homosexuals were often attracted to this high church tradition, the kind of flamboyance, indeed we might think a certain campness, is often said to be one of the reasons why homosexuals were attracted to it. But actually, in many ways, homosexuals were attracted because of the acceptance and the tolerance that those church traditions offered. And it was an important part of homosexual life through the 40s, 50s, going back to the 19th century and coming up to the present day.